The South China Sea rarely sleeps. Cargo ships cross its lanes like veins of light. Fishing vessels linger where currents meet. Naval patrols move in quiet patterns, invisible beyond the horizon. Beneath all that motion, the sea holds its own silence, steady, patient, unreadable. On a June night in 2021, that silence was broken by a single pulse. The destroyer, KDX-12, was on routine exercise south of the Spratly Islands. The mission: radar calibration and communication drills. Weather calm. Still, each time the green line crossed the screen, a few of them found themselves waiting for that flicker, that bright pulse that had broken routine the night before. It never came back. Weeks later, when analysts onshore examined the data, they found no fault, no interference, no trace of manipulation. The signal was clean, the movement impossible. The final line of the official report read, "No conclusive determination. Data archived for further study." A single sentence for something the sea itself seemed to remember. In the end, the ocean returned to quiet. Its surface glittered under the sun as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But deep below, where sound travels farther than light, the echo of that night lingered, in the memory of machines and in the silence of those who had watched it happen. Visibility, excellent. No tension, no expectation. Inside the operations room, the lights were dim and the air thick with the hum of machines. Operators watched their screens, tracing the slow green sweep of radar. Every few seconds, the same rhythm: sweep, return, silence. Then, at 22:37, a new echo appeared. A faint mark, low contrast, drifting near the outer range. Lieutenant Park, the radar officer, leaned closer. He adjusted gain, rechecked frequency. The echo remained. Too clear to be noise, too isolated to be normal. Possible clutter, he said quietly. The supervisor, Commander Han, moved beside him. Record it. On the next sweep, the mark vanished. 2 seconds later, it returned. Brighter. Bearing 210, Park reported. Range 87 kilometers. Altitude uncertain. Han's voice stayed even. Cross-check secondary radar. The second array confirmed it. Both systems showed the same return, same bearing. No known aircraft in the sector. No surface reflection. No error code. Han called to the bridge. Visual contact? Negative, came the reply. Clear horizon. The mark began to move, slowly at first, then sharply upward. Altitude readings climbed. 3,000, 6,000, 10. It paused, motionless. Park frowned. Stationary at 10,000 feet. Han studied the scope. Stationary? How? No velocity. Just stopped. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the low hum of electronics. The object remained steady for 6 sweeps, then accelerated again. From 0 knots to 600, then 1,200. No aircraft they knew could do that without leaving a heat trail. Infrared sensors showed nothing. Still tracking? Han asked. Yes, sir. Now descending. The radar emitted a quiet, alert tone. An automatic warning triggered when a target's motion exceeds known aerodynamic limits. The operators checked calibration again. Perfect. At 22:45, the Echo stopped descending and held steady 2,000 feet above the water. Range 71 kilometers, Park said. Holding position. Outside, the sea was calm. The moon hung pale over black water. The destroyer's wake shone faintly in the dark. Nothing moved in the sky. Inside, the Echo lingered, motionless, unwavering. Then, without warning, it split. 2 identical returns appeared where one had been. Equal strength, same altitude, separating slowly. One north, one west. Separation event, Park whispered. Han's tone didn't change. Tag both. 401A and 2401B. The operators watched as the 2 signals drifted apart, then merged again. 2 lights crossing paths on an invisible grid. Seconds later, one vanished. The other began climbing at impossible speed, beyond 30,000 feet, then disappeared from range. Silence returned. Han exhaled softly. Save the raw data. Park nodded. Recording complete. By morning, the sea was as it had been, flat, reflective, anonymous. At 08 on Kwai, a debrief was held in the ship's wardroom. Charts spread across the table, coffee cooling beside them. The captain listened as Han read the report. Unidentified aerial contact. Duration, 23 minutes. Multi-sensor verification. No visual confirmation. System malfunction? The captain asked. None, sir. Atmospheric reflection? Unlikely. Any civilian or military traffic in that sector? Negative. The captain paused. Then we reported as unidentified radar contact, end of note. The words were simple, almost mechanical, but behind them lay the same unspoken question that always follows anomalies. If the instruments are right, then what exactly did they see? Han said nothing. Procedure required observation, not interpretation. He signed the form, logged the time, and moved on. That night, the operators returned to their posts. The radar swept in its endless rhythm. Nothing unusual appeared. The data arrived 2 days later, sealed in a gray case with a red tag, for technical review only. Inside were the logs from the destroyer KDX-12, hours of radar telemetry, timestamps, and environmental readings. No commentary, no speculation, just numbers. At the Maritime Analysis Division in Busan, the files were unpacked and copied into the secure system. Screens flickered to life across a silent room. The analysts gathered, engineers, signal experts, and one civilian physicist. She smiled faintly. Maybe it should be. Weeks passed. The sea went on producing reflections and noise as it always had, but C-21-2401 stayed different. A pattern too perfect, a silence too deliberate. When the final review closed, the last line of the document read, "No further inquiry required unless recurrence occurs." It was administrative closure, not understanding. The analysts went back to routine, frequencies, calibrations, expected results. Yet sometimes, when the radar sweep on their screens looked too empty, a few of them would remember that strange, symmetrical climb, and the quiet moment after, when nothing was supposed to exist, but something still had. In the end, the data settled only on paper, inside the machines, inside memory. It remained alive, a perfect trace without a cause. For the Navy, it was a closed file. For the ocean, it was simply another echo waiting to return. Their work was simple: verify the anomaly, find the error. On the main display, the radar trace unfolded. A faint pulse appeared, climbed, stopped, divided, and vanished. The pattern repeated perfectly across 2 radar systems. No dropouts, no interference, no corrupted frames. Commander Lee, the lead analyst, leaned forward. "Cross-check with the secondary array," he said. The technician replied, "Confirmed, sir. Identical timing. Environmental data? Stable inversion at 200 meters. No lightning. No strong ducks." Lee frowned. "Then what caused it?" No one answered. Kim So-min, the physicist, spoke softly. "It's not consistent with atmospheric reflection. The altitude steps are too discrete." Lee glanced at her. "Then it's software noise." She shook her head. "Noise doesn't repeat twice, in symmetry." On screen, the object's ascent curve looked almost mechanical. Straight, deliberate. When it split, both signals mirrored each other in strength and timing. The room stayed quiet. Each person understood what that implied and why no one would say it aloud. Lee exhaled. "Record all variables. We'll start elimination." The next 48 hours were methodical. They tested calibration logs, radar temperature drift, atmospheric gradients, even the angle of the ship's antenna mast. Every metric came back normal. One technician suggested electronic interference. Another mentioned ducting from temperature layers. Both theories failed under comparison. Kim stared at the data, tracing the pattern with her finger. "It's too clean. Even nature makes mistakes." By the second day, the file had a name: CA-21-2401. a case number that would soon replace its story. On the third morning, a call came from Joint Command Seoul requesting an interim assessment. Commander Lee summarized it in the language of procedure: multi-sensor anomaly, no visual correlation, probable environmental interference pending confirmation. He read the line twice before signing it. It sounded definitive but meant nothing. That was the point. After he left, Kim stayed behind. The office was quiet except for the low hum of the servers. She replayed the sequence again. The climb, the stop, the split. It ran like clockwork, frame by frame. She whispered, "Why would interference behave like intent?" The screen didn't answer. The data moved exactly as before. 2 days later, the files were forwarded to Joint Maritime Command. A new review board assembled: officers, scientists, one intelligence liaison. The meeting room was dim, the air filtered and still. Admiral Choi opened the session. "We're not here to define what it was," he said. "Only what it wasn't." Charts appeared on the screen. Radar sweeps, infrared data, environmental overlays. Each ruled out one possible cause and exposed another gap. No transponder, no heat trail, no weather anomalies, no software fault. Choi leaned back. "So we are left with an observation." Kim nodded. "Yes, Admiral. An observation that doesn't fit known models." The Admiral studied her face. "Then we classify it as unknown." The stenographer wrote the word unknown carefully. In reports like this, language mattered more than truth. That afternoon, the summary was transmitted upward. Unidentified aerial contact observed during training operations. Multiple radar confirmation. No environmental correlation. No visual record. Further analysis recommended. It was signed, stamped, and filed. Another report in an archive that would soon forget it existed. Yet for those who had handled the data, forgetting was harder. Commander Lee began to recheck older radar logs, wondering if smaller anomalies had been overlooked. Kim compared the object's motion to known atmospheric plasma events. Nothing matched. During one late shift, she told a colleague, "Maybe we should accept that we don't know." The colleague shrugged. "That's not what the job is for." The order came before sunrise. A P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft would fly a standard survey route over the southern South China Sea. Officially, it was part of a joint exercise. Unofficially, the mission brief carried one line that drew attention: verify coordinates related to radar anomaly CE21-2401. To the crew, it sounded like another long, quiet flight. At 0542, the aircraft rose from the runway at Cana. The morning light was thin, the air still. "No," Evans said, "they just keep us steady." Neither spoke again. That evening, the mission summary reached Joint Maritime Command. Its wording matched the destroyer's earlier report almost exactly. Unidentified aerial phenomena observed, multi-sensor correlation, no visual contact, no hostile intent detected. It was a sentence designed to close a door, not open one. Still, a few analysts would read it and notice the precision, the identical pattern to the ship's anomaly, the same bearing, the same duration. To them, coincidence was beginning to look like repetition. In the months that followed, the Poseidon crew flew many missions. None recorded another anomaly. But each time the radar sweep crossed a quiet sky, Sung found himself watching a little more closely. Sometimes when the console lights dimmed, he could almost feel the presence of that silent shape, something that had moved faster than equations and left only silence behind. He never spoke of it again. For the Navy, it remained a small entry in a large database. For the people who had seen it, it was something else. A reminder that even in a world built on measurement, there are moments that refuse to stay still. From altitude, the ocean looked like a sheet of gray metal stretching past the horizon. Inside, the flight deck was calm, checklists were read, numbers called out. The hum of engines filled the silence between words. For nearly an hour, everything was routine. The radar scanned in slow sweeps, marking cargo traffic and weather fronts. The operators logged each contact with practiced indifference. Then, at 0712, a new return appeared. Weak, intermittent, about 90 kilometers ahead. Lieutenant Sung, the tactical coordinator, leaned closer to his screen. Contact bearing 210, range 90, altitude unclear. The pilot, Commander Evans, kept his tone neutral. Surface or air? Neither fits, Sung replied. It's too high for reflection, too clean for clutter. He tagged the blip. The radar labeled it automatically. Track 11B. 2 minutes later, the signal strengthened. The object began to move, slow at first, then accelerating to 400 knots. Evans glanced at his instruments. Confirm speed. Confirmed, Sung said. Now climbing. There was no transponder, no radio return, no heat bloom visible on infrared. Yet the radar painted a solid shape, holding altitude, then rising again. At 0715, the contact matched the aircraft's height, 22,000 feet. Sung's voice was low. It's level with us. Evans turned slightly to port, keeping distance. Visual, the co-pilot scanned the horizon. Negative. Outside, the sky was empty, a pale gradient over the flat sea. Inside, the instruments disagreed. The contact rose sharply to 30,000 feet, paused, then dropped in seconds to 5,000. Sung whispered, "Descent rate exceeds sensor limits." Evans asked quietly, "Meaning?" "Meaning the system can't calculate it." The pilot said nothing more. He adjusted course to hold observation range. On the infrared display, a faint blotch appeared, colder than surrounding air. It pulsed once, then steadied. Sung tried to lock the camera. The image slipped, refocused, then vanished. He recorded the sequence anyway. At 0718, the object hovered 5,000 feet above the sea. For 30 seconds, it held position. Then a second echo appeared beside it. Sung straightened. Split event confirmed. 2 returns, identical amplitude. Distance? Evans asked. 1.5 nautical miles, moving apart. Both signals drifted sideways, mirroring each other's path. Then, without acceleration buildup, they merged again. One bright pulse, and gone. The radar fell silent. Sung checked settings, replayed diagnostics. Everything was normal. Contact lost, he said quietly. Evans kept his eyes on the horizon. Save all data. Full packet. The crew obeyed without discussion. No one speculated aloud. The Poseidon continued its route until midday. The radar showed nothing unusual. When Mission Control requested status, Evans answered in standard phrasing. Negative visual contact. Positive radar and infrared anomaly recorded for 5 minutes, 28 seconds. Data archived. Copy, came the reply. Continue patrol. That was the end of the transmission. By procedure, the crew would file their report on landing. The language would be technical, stripped of adjectives. Words like unexplained or impossible had no place in official vocabulary. Yet when they landed at Kadena 3 hours later, the silence among them said what the paperwork would not. On the tarmac, as maintenance crews refueled the aircraft, the heat shimmered against the fuselage. Evans stood by the nose of the plane, looking at the empty sky. Sung approached, holding a tablet. "The recording's clean," he said. "Any clue?" "None. No glitch, no ghosting. Whatever it was, it moved with intention." Evans gave a short nod. "Then it goes into the archive." "Just like that?" "That's the rule." Sung looked out toward the horizon. "Rules don't explain it." The report reached Joint Maritime Command 1 week later. It came through secure channels, stamped confidential. The summary was brief. Unidentified aerial phenomena observed by naval and airborne radar systems, multi-sensor confirmation. No visual contact. Further review required. No theories. No conclusions. Only data. An inquiry board was formed inside a gray building in Seoul. Months later, during an internal seminar, Admiral Choi addressed a group of young officers. He spoke without notes. You will encounter anomalies, blips, echoes, readings that make no sense. The temptation is to explain them. Resist it. Record what you see and let the data stand. Our duty is observation, not interpretation. Someone asked, "But what if it was something real, sir?" Choi looked at the young man. "Everything is real to the instrument that measures it. Whether it exists beyond that, let the sea decide." No one responded. The sound of the air conditioning filled the space. Weeks later, the file was requested again, for comparison with a new radar incident near Okinawa. When analysts opened it, they found the same clean trace, the same impossible acceleration, the same absence of explanation. The notation at the bottom of the first page caught their eyes. Data verified, source unresolved. One analyst said quietly, "It's like the sea's handwriting." No one disagreed. Officially, the investigation had ended. Unofficially, it had only deepened the question. The machines had done their job faithfully, observed, recorded, archived. The humans, too, had followed protocol, reported, reviewed, concluded. And yet, between those two layers, between signal and silence, something remained unresolved. It wasn't the anomaly that unsettled them. It was the precision of it, the way it behaved as if aware of being watched. When the final report was filed, its closing line was identical to dozens before it. No conclusive determination. It was the truest sentence they could write. 8 members, 4 naval officers, 2 engineers, a physicist, and 1 intelligence liaison sat beneath a single map of the South China Sea. The room had no windows. A small clock ticked above the door. Rear Admiral Choi Hyun-soo opened the session. "Gentlemen, our task is to determine what was observed and whether it poses a risk to navigation or security. Nothing more." He spoke without emphasis, the way someone reads a checklist. The first presentation came from Commander Han, still calm, still exact. He replayed the destroyer's radar feed, a faint mark climbing, stopping, splitting, and vanishing. Then, he displayed the aircraft data, 2 independent systems showing the same pattern within minutes. When the lights came back on, no one spoke. Admiral Choi turned to Dr. Kim So-min, the civilian physicist who had analyzed the files earlier in Busan. Her voice was measured. "The signal coherence is too precise to be environmental. 2 separate radars, 2 geometries, same timing. There is no known natural mechanism for that alignment." One of the younger officers shifted uneasily. "Then we're saying it was physical?" Kim paused. "We're saying it was recorded." The distinction hung in the air like static. The next 3 days were spent eliminating causes. Engineers examined calibration logs. Perfect. Meteorologists reviewed inversion layers. Weak, normal. The intelligence liaison confirmed no foreign flights, no satellite transits, no electronic warfare signatures. Each answer narrowed the mystery instead of resolving it. By the 3rd morning, the panel had run out of simple explanations. Commander Han summarized quietly. The data was valid. The phenomenon behaved as though under control, but we cannot identify it. Admiral Choi asked, "Was there any sign of threat?" "None, sir." "Any communication attempt?" "No response, no emission." The Admiral nodded. "Then we treat it as non-hostile. Record as unknown." The stenographer wrote the words carefully. "Unknown. No hostile intent detected." It sounded conclusive. It wasn't. That afternoon, the board reviewed similar archives from Allied forces, incidents in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Mediterranean. Different dates, same description: sharp acceleration, sudden stops, radar correlation, no visual contact. The physicist pointed at the pattern. If these are errors, they are repeating in identical form across multiple systems. The intelligence officer replied dryly. Then perhaps the errors are coordinated. No one laughed. Admiral Choi ended the meeting with a single line. We are not here to imagine, we are here to record. A week later, the official report was finalized. 6 pages long, 4 pages of data, 1 of environmental notes, and 1 of conclusions. It read, Unidentified aerial contact observed during joint naval operations. Multi-sensor verification. No environmental or technical anomalies sufficient to explain behavior. Source undetermined. The last sentence added, No further action recommended unless recurrence occurs. It was signed, sealed, and filed under code CA21-2401. Inside the office of the Defense Analysis Bureau, a copy of the report was quietly archived beside dozens of similar cases. The archivist noted its date and moved on. Outside, life continued. Ships left port, radar swept, drills resumed. But among those who had sat in that room, the silence stayed. Dr. Kim returned to her lab. Sometimes, late at night, she replayed the footage. The rise, the split, the disappearance. She would watch the numbers change in perfect rhythm and think, even illusions need a cause. Commander Han went back to sea. He said nothing about the investigation to his new crew. Yet each time the radar room dimmed, he felt the same quiet expectation, as though the ocean might answer again. By the end of the year, the ocean had swallowed the story. The coordinates where it happened were busy again. Merchant convoys, fishing trawlers, joint patrols, tracing the same invisible lines. Nothing strange appeared on radar. Nothing unexpected crossed the sky. The sea had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Inside the Navy's archive, the report known as CA21-2401 sat untouched in a gray folder. 6 pages. 1 line of conclusion, no conclusive determination. Data retained for further study. She stared at the letters for a long while before saving the file and closing the terminal. Years from now, the incident will remain in the archive. Some analysts will open it again, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps to compare it with something new. The numbers will look the same: bearing, range, altitude, duration. The graphs will still trace a perfect symmetry of ascent and disappearance. And someone will wonder, as others did before, how a record can be flawless and still mean nothing. The ocean, meanwhile, will continue its work. Waves rising and falling. Radio waves bending and breaking. Radars will hum. Crews will watch. The line between noise and signal will stay thin. From time to time, a faint echo may flicker at the edge of the screen. Most will ignore it. A few will remember. None will explain it. Because the sea keeps its secrets. It offers patterns, then takes them back. It allows machines to see, but not to understand. In the final analysis, there is no conclusion, only the record and the silence that follows it. A moment when the instruments say something happened and the world around them insists nothing did. Between those two truths lies the story of every mystery ever written on water. And somewhere, in the space between one radar sweep and the next, the sea still waits to speak again. To the institution, that was closure. To those who had witnessed it, it was only silence. Commander Han was assigned to another vessel the following spring. He resumed the same routine: drills, bearings, weather reports, nightly radar checks. The hum of electronics felt familiar again, the steady sweep of the beam comforting in its repetition. Yet sometimes, when the screen looked too empty, he found himself waiting for a bright echo that never returned. When asked later about the incident, he said simply, "We saw what we saw. We logged what we could. The rest is beyond us." He never said more. In Busan, Dr. Kim So-min continued her work on radar propagation models. She rarely mentioned C-121-2401, but a single printed frame from the analysis still hung above her desk, a green pulse rising from the horizon, splitting into two dots. A visiting colleague once asked, "Why keep it?" Kim smiled faintly. "It reminds me that precision isn't the same as understanding." The colleague nodded. Neither spoke again. At Joint Maritime Command, the file became a reference example. Young officers studied it to learn proper reporting procedure for unidentified radar contacts. It was taught not as mystery, but as discipline: how to record anomalies without bias, how to describe without deciding. During one lecture, Rear Admiral Choi summarized the lesson. "The ocean does not explain itself. It only reflects our questions." His words were quiet, but the room stayed silent long after he finished. Beyond the walls of command, stories began to drift. Some sailors said it had been a new stealth drone tested under secrecy. Others insisted it was a radar mirage, a trick of warm air and cold water. A few avoided talking about it altogether, as though naming it gave it weight. Officially, nothing more was said. Unofficially, the story became another whisper among those who spend their lives at sea, a caution, a curiosity, a rumor without edges. When asked by a journalist months later, a defense spokesman offered the same sentence used 100 times before. The Navy investigates all anomalous radar events to ensure operational safety. No evidence of threat or hostile intent has been found. He said it with calm certainty. But certainty was never part of the record. In January 2022, a different patrol in nearby waters recorded a faint, short-lived echo moving faster than wind speed before vanishing. The report noted, similar to CA-21-2401, insufficient data for assessment. The pattern was weaker, the behavior familiar. It went into the same archive, under a new number. By then, no one expected answers. The job was to observe, not to solve. Late that winter, Han visited the coast near Busan. The wind was sharp, the sea steel gray. Cargo ships drifted on the horizon, their lights flickering like slow Morse code. He stood by the water and thought about the night when a point of light had risen where nothing should have been. He remembered how calm it had been, how quiet the control room felt as the numbers changed faster than thought, how quickly the event had vanished into paperwork. He had followed every procedure, every rule. Still, something about it felt unfinished, like a question that never reached its answer. Before leaving, he wrote a single line in his pocket notebook. "The sea remembers more than it tells." He closed the book and didn't open it again. Back in Seoul, Dr. Kim reviewed new data from satellite arrays. She noted occasional transient returns, tiny blips lost between clouds and currents. She wrote in the margin, "Possibly natural, possibly not." Then she paused and added, "Pattern consistent with C21 to 2401. It was the first time the code had appeared in her notes in months.